Opening day right around the corner, and that means a bunch of baseball books are coming out, and there's a new baseball book which is unlike any of the others. The book is called Trading Bases, a story about Wall Street, gambling, and baseball. Joe Peta, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that intro, too. My favorite thing is when somebody says to me, I didn't think there was a way to take a different look at baseball, and your book did that.
Well, your book definitely did that, and who would have thought that you getting fired from Lehman Brothers and getting run over by an ambulance turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to you?
Yeah, that's. I don't want to relive it, but yes, I will say this would not have happened without that. 2 years ago, I was in New York City and about to start my 15th year as a trader of stocks, most of which had been spent at Lehman Brothers. And I got run over by an ambulance as I crossed the street on foot. And it left me in a wheelchair, and it left me unable to work. And worse, my family lived in San Francisco, so I was stranded for a few months in New York City recuperating. And I threw myself into the baseball season and ended up taking a little different look at the season.
Basically, you took your hedge fund knowledge and applied it to betting on baseball.
Yeah, I really did, and it started with looking at baseball from the sabermetric perspective. And which now I think it's more of a mainstream knowledge thanks to a movie like Moneyball. But what I did was I was using this data and opening my spreadsheets to build my own projections. I started realizing, boy, this is very similar to the models we use to value stocks. And I know what I'd do if I saw a stock that I thought was under or overvalued. And I just applied then that type of logic to baseball.
How long did it take you from figuring that out to actually using the system to bet on baseball?
Well, I started in spring training that year. I started building these projections for teams, and I was sending them to my degenerate buddies that I used to work with, and I use that term with affection.
Yeah.
And
partial affection.
Yes. And as I realized, like, man, there's some real differences between the outlooks that I see, and I could sort of look at what the Vegas over-under win totals were for the year for some different teams. And I thought, okay, let's try to put this to work on a daily basis just like I would at a hedge fund. In other words, find a little edge, make a portfolio with it, put a small amount of money on it, and then try to repeat it hundreds of times over the year. And fortunately, baseball is perfect for that, given that there's 2,400 games over 6 months.
Okay, so you did this for a year.
Yes, I did, 2011. That's right. That's what the body of the book is about 2011, and the fund that I put together was up 41%. So I handed the book in a year ago, and my publisher said to me, like, Joe, we love the book. Would you consider going to Las Vegas for us in 2012 and with, like, the marketing budget for the book and betting on games? And I'm like, yes, I would. So I actually raised a fund from some other people. I actually raised $1 million and went to Vegas in 2012, and the fund was up 14% last year. So I think a lot went right in 2011. But that's the epilogue of the book, and it was it was really fun to truly run other money doing it.
But even if you're up 14%, I know a lot of degenerate gamblers, and I say that with affection because I'm referring to some family members who would have loved to have been up 14%.
Yeah, and I think one thing I really try to talk about in the book is distinguish between gambling as entertainment, which is what I think what I and my coworkers and maybe your family members have always done, betting on football games, betting on teams we like, our college teams, et cetera. And I really took a different approach to the baseball in that I took sort of the financial world tenets on capital management and risk management, and that's how I kind of lay out in the book. I lay out how I did that and why it was much more healthy for me to say, hey, I'm not trying to make $500 this week. I'm trying to just make 1 or 2% on my money.
The book is called Trading Bases, a story about Wall Street, gambling, and baseball, not necessarily in that order. Joe Peta, our guest. So did Dutton, the publisher, increase your marketing budget by 14%?
Yes, I think they did. They were quite pleased, and they added. They gave me a whole bunch more exposure.
While looking at your metrics, did you change anything from 2011 to 2012?
Yeah, that's a great question. The template stayed the same, but yes, there were definitely changes. I sort of think as a model is almost like a living organism. It's it's certainly scientific in terms of how, numbers have to add up, et cetera. But there's a lot of art in deciding exactly what the inputs are and how much weight to put on them. And I can tell you specifically, I had no predictors of defense in 2011 that I did use in 2012 and going forward.
2011, a team here locally you might have heard of, the St. Louis Cardinals, came back from oblivion to win the World Series. Did you have that in your crystal ball?
Yeah, no, I did not. And in fact, I talk about that in the book. The one thing that was notable in August was I did notice in August that it looked to me, mostly because they were completely healthy and there were a lot of other teams that were injured, that St. Louis was really rolling out the strongest lineup every night for the last 5 weeks of the season. Now, they were far enough behind. I didn't see them getting to October. But it was, the other part of the book is really how much I rediscovered my love of baseball. It had meant so much to me as a kid. It had meant a lot to my father, and that was sort of passed on to me. And I had become a lapsed baseball fan. And really watching so much baseball in 2011, and then especially the magic of that October, really brought back, how much baseball meant to me.
The book is Trading Bases. Joe Peta, our guest, and through getting fired from Lehman Brothers and being hit by a ambulance, had nothing to do except a computer and baseball, and hence the book Trading Bases, a story about Wall Street, gambling, and baseball. Joe, has any Major League Baseball teams contacted you, not necessarily gambling-wise, but in terms of player development and or player performance-wise?
Yeah, they haven't, and I don't really expect that. And I'll tell you, I think that so much of that work is now being done in turn. I think the one nice thing, or unique thing about baseball was, obviously starting with Bill James, is that outsiders had done so much of the work initially, and then it took a while till the teams adopted it. I think that's really changed now. I think there's so much proprietary stuff going on within teams that, even though all this old data is in the public domain, I think they have their own ideas, really, of what they're doing going forward.
So did you take the Bill James's information and the other informations and then sort of compile it and then use your expertise? Or was it all numbers, and or did you come up with your own set of formulas?
Well, I came up with some of my own set of formulas, but nothing would have been possible without the work of Nate Silver, Bill James, etc. I really used those as building blocks for what I was doing. But what I really wanted to know is a lot of what Bill James does and a lot of what the whole sabermetric community does say is want to argue over whether Mike Trout or Miguel Cabrera should have been MVP last year. And I was the segment of sabermetrics that I was much more concerned with was what data that exists is more predictive of what's going to happen in the future. So I'm not really worried about grading players in the past or anything. I just want to say, hey, what's not repeatable? And I'll give you an example. The Kansas City Royals had 51 outfield assists last year. That is off the charts high. And of course, that's skill based. Those guys have guns, Francoeur and Gordon especially. But almost like a cornerback in football that has a lot of interceptions one year, usually doesn't repeat the next year because teams can change their offense. They don't throw at them. And it's the same thing is you shouldn't be running on Kansas City's outfielders. And those 51 outfield assists by Kansas City last year, that helped mask some weaknesses on the pitching staff, some weaknesses on otherwise on defense. And if that's not repeatable this year, that's going to be kind of a hidden deficit that might cost could cost Kansas City 2 or 3 wins this year. And I say that that's not repeatable because if you look every year, the team that leads the league in outfield assists, they never lead it the next year. They always drop back to the mean. So I think that would be an example of stuff I look at.
Joe Peta, hold on. The book is called Trading Bases. You are the author, Joe Peta, a story about Wall Street, gambling, and baseball, not necessarily in that order. Back in a moment on the Big 550 KTRS.